Welcome to this recording of Leadership Lessons from Elite Sport, a talk that was given by former head teacher Derek Peaple on the 18th of January 2023. It was a webinar that was sponsored by Atom Learning. Thanks to their generosity, it was made available completely free of charge to everybody who attended, and that's why this recording is also available for free as well. So thank you to Atom. Now, Derek is an inspirational speaker. He was a nominee for the Times Education National Head Teacher of the Year Award. He is the co-founder of the World Peace School Sports Day. He's an education advisor to the Worcester Warriors, and he's also head of education with Sporting Heritage. This is in addition to acting as a consultant for numerous organisations such as the BBC, the British Council, the EU, and the Department for Education. And he also writes for UK national newspapers as well. So it was a real privilege to have Derek with us last night. So without any further ado, on to the recording. I hope you enjoy.
So if we can have as much debate as possible, I think that will be absolutely fantastic. So believe it or not, that very hirsute and lithe young man that you see there is me about 40 years ago. And I don't think I sort of believed at the time, when I was a member of Reading Athletic Clubs, competing in cross country and track, that perhaps some of the lessons that I learned from my sporting performance were actually going to shape my professional life. But here I am after 20 years of secondary headship in my office. That's the damage that 20 years of secondary headship can do to you, and 35 years in the profession. But I had the pleasure and privilege of leading a sports college where sport shaped ethos. It wasn't about winning more cups and trophies, although that was very nice. It was about how the values of sport helped to build both performance and young people's own value system. And you'll see some of those paintings behind me in my office in the background. Those were prints of massive paintings that young people had done around the school, taking iconic moments in sport and recording them in the style of a particular artistic genre. And my first practical tip of the day, if you like, is that they turn into really nice little greetings cards. So what you're doing is then reinforcing the values of your school that young people have produced. I used to write a handwritten card every Friday to young people who had lived those values: excellence, determination, courage, resilience, all of the values that we associate with sport. They landed on the doormat of the homes on a Saturday morning. Everybody felt a bit better. First practical tip. There's more theoretical reflections perhaps, but we will also try and pick up some practice out of this. So key question is, how do we develop consistently high performing teams learning from the world of sport? But you're not just going to listen to me about this. We've got some guest speakers through the evening, some of whom you may recognise, some of them you may not. Some of them are currently in post and some of them are not, or have just found new posts. We don't have any input, unfortunately, from David's perspective, from anybody from Nottingham Forest. We were having a little discussion before we came on, but no reflection there on performance. So the starting point is to think about that famous Mandela quote and that iconic moment about sport having the power to change the world, the power to inspire, and the power to unite people in the way that little else can. And I think key themes this evening are around inspiration and uniting a team around your vision. And in this case, it is the language of leadership that we're going to look at. What can we apply from the world of elite sports coaching about consistently high performing teams and why they're consistently high performing? Now, my starting point for this actually was during lockdown. That's Jill Ellis. She is arguably and statistically the most successful World Cup football coach of all time. She coached the USA women's football team to consecutive World Cups in 2014 and 2018. She was the Serena Begum of that particular era. She's British by heritage and coached the Americans. This is what she had to say about leading during lockdown.
You guys today is the simple one, and that's why I've got this visual. It is to keep coaching your team. Consistency we talk about in soccer, the sign of a really good team and the sign of a really good player is consistency. But I think consistency for your team right now is something that they can lean on. It may feel emotionally kind of like this visual that your locker room is empty, that your bench is vacant, and that there's no fans in the crowd. But first and foremost, I think we have to acknowledge and recognize that your team still needs you, even though their world is maybe upside down and their environment is very different. It's important to make sure that you still lead and you're still there for them. And because they need to feel like they have a purpose, and they have to feel that they have someone to follow, even when there is so much uncertainty in the world that we're living in right now.
So, interestingly, I led my school through the first phase of lockdown. If anybody questioned my educational vision, I like to say I saw the pandemic coming and branched out into consultancy actually before the lockdown period, but led during it. And of course, that was a period of uncertainty. It was a period when actually I felt that schools were possibly the only point of stability in young people's and families' lives. And I suspect that uncertainty was reflected in the discontinuities of the teams, the staffing teams that you were leading. I'm not practically leading in a school now, but there is still, I sense, because I do school improvement work, that degree of uncertainty, that discontinuity. So how, in a sense, is your leadership amplified in terms of the teams that you lead, whether that's as a head, whether it's as a deputy, a senior teacher, a head of department? So as we go through today, perhaps reflect on one leadership learning outcome that you'd like to take, whether that's practical, whether it's in terms of wider thinking or development. Because the starting point for this as well was a request for me to develop a programme that would pick up through sport on the new head teacher standards. I think there are 9 strands. They can become, I think, a little bit complex. 3 outcomes here to recognise the alignment between educational leadership and what we can learn about shared purpose, teamwork, innovation, and so forth. How we build our teams and how we sustain their performance. Because for me, there are 3 key themes here, and we'll break into 3 sessions. And I think David would like to pick up probably after the second one briefly. But 3 key themes for me come out of those leadership standards. And they are creating a sense of purpose, shared values and purpose, values driven, motivating a team around that to deliver results in line with values and vision, and sustaining that over time. And those are really the areas that we're going to explore in the course of the next sort of 3/4 of an hour. So let's pick up on this idea of shared cultural values and purpose that drive the ethos of the school. I'm going to start then around values, vision and mission. And we're going to start in slightly unfashionable Leicester City and Brendan Rodgers. Leicester, against all the odds, won the FA Cup against Chelsea in 2021. Brendan Rodgers has been the manager of a number of football clubs. This is what he has to say about creating purpose.
But it's something, and likewise we hear, it's finding a cause. I always go into a club, find the cause that's going to pull everyone together. And then, because ultimately it's about getting players to play for you. And how do you get them to play for you? It's connecting emotionally. That's ultimately what it is. You can be good as coach as you want, but if you cannot connect the emotion of it all, then it can be tough, Matthew. And that's what I always pride myself in doing, going into a club and looking to connect everyone and have this one vision for one club. What would you just say?
One vision for one club, making emotional connections, finding a cause. I guess if you were to reflect for a moment, maybe you want to put something in the chat. What's your cause? What's your cause? What drives your team? What's the cause that unites your team in your school, your department, your area of responsibility? What emotional connection do you create there? And what's your one vision, not for your club, but for your school, for your department? Maybe reflect on that, or begin to put some ideas into the chat that people can pick up on. Let's develop that a little bit further with Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr is one of the most successful basketball coaches in history. He is the head coach at the Golden State Warriors, having been a fantastic player himself.
So you can't just create a culture by saying what it is and writing it down. That's a good start, but then you have to follow that up with practicing those values each day. So, for example, one of our values is joy. I like to promote a lot of joy within our team, and so that's something I wrote down when I just like Sasha, when I took over the team. I wrote down, what I felt like our culture should be. It was really based on my personality, what was important to me as a coach, because that's, the team should be a reflection of my vision and my personality as a coach. And so joy was one of them. But if you want joy to be part of your culture, you can't just come in and yell at your players all day and have, practices that aren't any fun. There has to be joy in practice, right? Yeah. And so that's why we play music. That's why we have humor. We do birthday videos. We do a lot of fun things. We'll do all kinds of things to create this atmosphere of fun and joy, because if that's going to become part of our culture, the only way for it to happen is for them to feel that each day.
Okay.
So our values lived. I love the concept of joy. Schools should be places of joy, shouldn't they? You look at websites, you look at mission statements, which talk about what difference schools will make to young people in their mission. But is the joy of learning celebrated? How is it lived every day? What are the practical actions that you take? How do you bring your staff together to share joyful moments? Interesting reflections, I think, there from Steve Kerr. And again, maybe into chat, if you can share some of those moments where you collectively celebrate the joy of what you do and make that visible to everyone. And perhaps this is part of the second section about how you actually translate that into your team. But I thought it was very interesting, clearly a lot about the way in which English cricket has suddenly been revitalised. This article very recently, only less than a month ago in the Times, that Stokes has instilled joy, fun and shared objectives, and actually that removes pressure. Clearly it's high performance stakes. Interesting, I think. This is Matt Smith, another high performing American coach, the Atlanta Falcons. How is culture reflected across the school? Is the culture of a school just about the teachers, or is it about all of the stakeholders, including those that you might buy in externally? Whether that's catering, whether it's cleaning. Are we all part of one team, therefore, in terms of shaping that? How is it shared? How is it communicated? How is it created? Interesting reflections, I think, there. Let's hear a little bit more on this from Joe Yap, the coach of Worcester Warriors women. I have two former students, two female students, who I sponsor through my consultancy company, who are part of the first team, both England age group internationals as they came through the school.
Personally, for me, culture is really important in a squad and in a training environment. It's something when I first started at Worcester that we looked at first, and trying to kind of create a sort of what the purpose of the program and where we were trying to go, and then how we were going to get there, and sort of put that out to players and staff in terms of how do we want to do this together, what values are really important to us, and we did a number of sort of workshops on this. I had somebody independent come in as well, like our psychologist, to help sort of kind of facilitate some of those conversations so we could all be involved in it. And ultimately, at the end of it, came out with a set of values that we all agreed that we would basically live by. And then from those, we sort of broke it down a little bit further into what does that look like on a day-to-day basis. So if we're saying honesty is one of the values we want to live by, actually, what does that look like in sort of in our environment? And that's like around sort of those honest conversations around selection, or if players have got problems, coming and speaking openly about them. So, you know, that was where we started. And we refer back to them a lot in terms of our work. I think it's very easy to set values at the start of, say, within rugby, at the start of the season, and then we don't look at them again until the end. And actually, you have to continuously reference them, I think, in the work we're doing. So, you know, there might be stuff happening now, and it's like, okay, well, does that fit our values? So no matter what's happening with results on and off the pitch, actually, what we need to always come back to is where we all sit within those.
Interesting, I think, there, in that, how often do you revisit your values? Whose values are they? I know, I mean, I led for 20 years a school of 1,300 young people, whatever that was, full-time equivalent staff, 70, whatever it might be. Lot of staff turnover, quite reasonably, quite to be expected. Whose values are they? Were the set of staff that I started with in 2002 weren't the staff that I was working with in 2020. So how often do you revisit that so that it's lived? And why is it important to come back to values, particularly, I guess, when there's tough decisions to be made? What are you going to prioritise in the curriculum? What do your values say about creativity? And then you've got to look at curriculum delivery and challenges in the creative curriculum. Or what do they say about physical activity and well-being? And maybe you've got to make hard decisions. It's really important, I think, and certainly there may well be, you know, heads and aspiring heads on the call. If you get a dissonance between both your personal values and your school values and the decisions that you have to make, that's where situations become genuinely stressful. So that's why I think the baseline is so important. Here's Wenger. Interesting one, this one, I guess, about, is it about writing down your values and your mission statement? Or, again, do they have to be lived? Is it enough just to have them written down? How often do you revisit? Do you have any performance management targets? Particularly those who, for colleagues who will be on upper paceline, about contributing actively to culture and mission? Or is it about technical expertise? What is it that those people add to mission, values, and culture? And a most recent observation, it's about having the right people in the building. We know culture is created by people. Everybody has it on the written on the wall, but it's what you do every day. And that's an observation from Southgate very, very recently. One piece, the last piece of video on this, not sporting.
I call it the golden circle. Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do, 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean, what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done. That's how most sales is done. And that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do. We say how we're different or how we're better. And we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one?
So that's Simon Sinek. Start with the why. What is your purpose? What drives you? And then the how you do that and the what you do comes from that core. So I guess my reflection after this point of the session is to ask you to reflect. What are the leadership takeaways from that first section around values, vision, culture? What might you apply in your context? I guess, what's your why? I don't know if, again, some of you would like to contribute in the chat box about what your why is and what your school's why is, or what your department's why is. And how then you can begin to think in relation to the communication of that to the rest of your team. David, I just pause very briefly there. I don't know if there's anything come through or anybody wants to shout out or add anything in at all at this particular point.
Nothing in there at the moment. Oh, hang on. So yes, we have. So Rashida Hack. So considering the school's values from a whole school perspective and not from the top down. Duncan Gowan has written he wants to inspire success. Louisa Ingram, the part about joy has really resonated with me. And Katie at the beginning was talking about the goals, and the goal for her in her SEND school was for all pupils to feel to leave school safe, happy, and prepared for the next stage.
Fantastic. And clearly opportunities for further reflections with teams there. Thank you all, and thank you, David. So let's move on to the second piece then, about if you've had that focus and that conversation and that discussion about the why, how do you then motivate the team? How do you galvanize everybody together to deliver that? We'll listen first to one of the most successful rugby coaches of all time from the All Blacks, Steve Hansen.
Obviously, but what's motivating you? Interestingly enough, I don't think my job is to motivate the team. My job is to create an environment where motivated athletes can perform.
Interesting. He actually doesn't believe it's about motivation of the individuals. It's creating the environment where they can then flourish. Let's unpick this a little bit more. Hansen has a bit more to say about what makes the All Blacks statistically the most successful rugby team, and in fact the most successful sports team of all time.
Look, leadership is about influencing through relationships. So it's not about a matter of how much IQ you've got, it's about how much EQ you've got. So understanding the environment you're in is going to be important. Building relationships within that, getting your team around you right, also really important, and what roles you want them to do. We've built a great honesty between the fans and the All Blacks, and I think making sure that they're strong enough to say what needs to be said and do what needs to be done, but also honest enough to be able to relay that in the right way. You'll have to build and drive links with our under-20 program. I think that's important for future selections. More on that.
Some interesting observations, I think, there, that actually the key to effective leadership of your team is not technical ability, it's your EQ, it's your emotional quotient, it's how you draw the best out of this diverse group of individuals that make your team, and it's being honest in those conversations. I like the idea of the All Blacks and the fans, how you build the relationship there. Is that actually the same as building the relationship with your wider community, your parents, the trust that you build? And I like the idea about the links with the youth development team, not just the young people. What are your progression pathways? What's your succession strategy? How are you developing the next leaders within your team already, and what that does in terms of motivation? I make some references to some further reading at the end. If there's one book I would suggest you read out of this, it's James Kerr's Legacy. Probably the best book on leadership I've ever read. 15 lessons, because there are 15 rugby players, aren't there, in the team? What makes the All Blacks the most successful people of all time? It's called Legacy because the key point is leave the jersey in a better place. Great assembly around that for leavers. Leave the blazer in a better place. What has your contribution been to the school that's made the school better because of your contribution? Really recommend that book. It's a great book. I don't know if anybody knows who Mel Marshall coaches. There's a clue in British swimming on a polo shirt. She's actually Adam Peaty's coach. And reference there to emotional intelligence. But again, are you recognizing that every individual in your team actually doesn't necessarily come as a teacher? Well, they do, don't they? But they come as a human being, and all of the stuff that's going on in their life. And how do you make that connection with each individual to unlock their potential? What's the relationship there with performance management? Is it technically driven, or are you thinking about their emotional growth? How do you set targets for them? Let's listen to one of the masters, Sir Alex Ferguson.
I used to lie in bed thinking about themes where I could address the players that would make an impact on them. I would talk about miners, shipyard workers, welders, toolmakers, people who come from poor backgrounds. And I used to ask them, what did your grandfather do? What did your father do? But I have to get the feeling inside them that what their grandfathers worked for, their grandmothers, is part of them. And they have to display that meaning. And taking away all the trophies I've won, and the great players I've had, I think it's a thing about life. It's a fact of life that where we come from is important. You come out with an identity. I come from Govan. I'm a Govan boy.
I was asked to write something for ASCL, the Association of School and College Leaders, when I moved out of headship. What was my first piece of advice for new heads? And I said, actually, do absolutely nothing, just drink lots of tea. Spend all of the first block of your time meeting your staff, the key resource that's going to drive your school forward. Do it with the young people as well. Make an appointment, make sure you go to every tutor group, meet every young person. But I spent 3 weeks just talking to staff, drinking more tea. I've got family from Swansea. Oh yeah. You're going to get so much more if you understand what makes those people tick, and making that, again, emotional connection. Doesn't mean to say you've got to be the friend. That's not the point in a professional context. It's understanding where the motivators are, where the levers are, and reading that overall. And I guess it's Carlo Ancelotti, one of the most successful football managers of all time, that actually I manage people, not players. You manage people, not teachers or support staff. They just happen to be good at what they do. And it's understanding that those drivers that I think is the key to getting the very best out of people professionally. And that's Paula Dunn, Team GB's athletics chief coach. Behind every number, there's a person. Never lose sight of that. And what's your role in that holistic support in their development? And that comes from listening more and talking less. And sometimes what they're not saying as well as what they are, in terms of reading the culture and the mood of your school and your team. And who are the people that you can really key into? Because they'll probably tell you when you've got it wrong, as well as when you're getting it right. And again, Mel, coming back to the core why. You won't take people with you unless you understand the why, the what, and the how that drives them as well. It's about making people feel 10 feet tall. And how you do that, how you use praise, how you recognise that. Last one on this section, just about Giselle Mather, the most qualified female rugby coach in the country.
I'm Giselle Mather, and I'm Worcester Ladies Director of Rugby and Head Coach. One of the things that I've learned as a coach over the years is that you can really accelerate your athletes' individual progress and development by investing time in getting to know the human being behind the athlete, by understanding what makes them tick and their genuine reasons for doing what they do, by learning what's important to them and the values that they hold, and by watching how they respond to, say, feedback and challenge and success and failure. By forming those kind of relationships, I've learned that the athlete development process is so much smoother, is a lot more purposeful, and a lot more fulfilling and fun for everyone involved.
Echoed by Pete Carroll from the Seattle Seahawks. We are a relationship-based organisations rather than having an outcome-based approach. Well, I mean, probably easy to say if you're one of the most successful American football coaches of all time, but I think the foundation there for that success is having those key, trusting and strong relationships. And that's interesting, isn't it, when it comes to selection policy? Do you pick the very best practitioners on paper, or do you go back to culture and ethos when you're thinking about selection when interviewing? How are those colleagues going to fit into the team overall? Are there other skills and qualities and behaviours that you need to consider in relation to that selection process? How do they work as a unit as a whole? What do they contribute? What's the wider value that they might bring when you're making choices around selection? So Clive Woodward, let's just hear a little bit about team there.
The way I basically did it was I have this saying that the great teams made great individuals. I mean, I'll never underscore the importance of teamwork and working together as a team of people. But I think if there's a secret to teamwork, if you get every individual working at his or her optimal level and becoming world class, the team stuff becomes a lot easier to do. And I've always had this vision of sort of, when it happened to me, being in charge of a team, you're looking around the room and you got half the team would be in any team in the world. They're the best in the world. So the individual has got to take responsibility for their individual training. And this is what I've got across to the players, that if we want to be successful, yes, you've got to be this individual. You've got to become the best in the world, better than any other prop forward, second row, fly half in the world. But also you've got to contribute to the team. You've got to have the bottle to start. If you're not, we're not going to win. So it's just getting across. And, you know, I still like bringing players here. There's every single player would come to a house, and, you know, just to sit down one-on-one, meet Jane, meet the kids, and get across to them. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity here, but I need it from you as well as me. You're going to get it from buckets from me and the coaching team, but to be really successful, it's got to be a two-way thing, and I think that's what we did. And I you know, I can't praise that team high enough. Hugely talented players, but the real secret was led by Johnston, led by Delalio. You know, they got this. They did contribute. They weren't yes men. They did question me, the other coaches, in a real positive way. And that's the way you can develop a team of people. But you've got to do it one by one. You've got to persuade every individual that I need you to be part of this. Or if you're not,
I'd question you being in this team.
So the individual investment in that time to create that sense of together, and not to be afraid of challenge as well from staff in terms of moving the organisation forward. Pretty obvious what that is. You can all shout at me at once that it's a teacup. But of course, that's one of Woodward's mantras as well. I don't know if anybody wants to put in the chat what it stands for, what the teacup is for, but it's thinking correctly under pressure. And I think it's a really interesting one to reflect on in a school setting, both for staff and for young people. How do you prepare people to think correctly under pressure? And if you think about that England rugby squad and that World Cup win in 2003 and that iconic drop goal at the very end in the match, 10 seconds to go, and how that developed from a copybook training ground move under the most intense pressure that you could imagine in sport. And it was executed perfectly because it had been rehearsed. When Ofsted calls, is it the first time that you think about how you're going to get the rest of the staff, if you're the head, working while you're tied up for an hour and a half? Do the people in your school, in those intense moments of pressure, know what they want, what they need to do? Can it become automatic? The phone call's in, what do we now do? Or is it scurrying around? And what about young people? And what about thinking about when they have to perform correctly under pressure? There's a great pre-exams assembly about that. If you've done the prep, you're prepared, you will then perform when it really counts in the exam room. And Woodward talks a lot about that in his book, Winning. And we'll finish off then just with Eddie Jones briefly, when he talks about how you communicate to teams.
To have opportunities with Japan and now with England to be able to exercise leadership skills. The main thing for me is learning that you've got to allow your team to lead. That's the big thing. And giving them opportunities to lead is the big thing that you have to do now. And I found the other important point, I think, everyone talks about how generations are different. I don't think they're different. They're different in the way they learn. And therefore, the way you impart your information has got to be different. Like, you can't give speeches like this to young people now. They switch off after 15 minutes because they want things like that. So we change our meetings completely. We have multimedia, multi-movement meetings. We never have a meeting where we're just giving information.
Interesting that. I mean, I've been talking to you largely now for about 38 minutes. Maybe it's just this particular format, but what do your staff meetings look like? What do your inset look like? Who leads that? How are they chunked? You think about the age profile of staff. I'm nearly 60, same age as Eddie, who was a teacher. Really interesting book on this comes from Matthew Syed, who's a sports writer in particular. He writes for the Times. But the thing about Rebel Ideas, there's some really interesting things about how different organisations structure their meetings. Amazon, you get your papers for a meeting when you turn up for the meetings. There's no prep because they want spontaneity. It's really interesting in the way in which, perhaps you just think about how meetings are structured. And Eddie says that actually sometimes they deliberately wouldn't turn up to meetings, senior leadership team. I don't know if you get away with that at school. But just, who does take the lead? How do you create self-sufficiently in that way? Or, do you give staff, do you give staff meetings agendas? Do you give your departmental meeting agendas? Is it bottom up? How do you think about it? So some brief reflections there. Any key leadership takeaways, anything you think about how you might want to, build your team? You've got your vision, you've got your why. How are you pulling everybody together around that? Any thoughts in chat? But I know, David, we've got about 20 minutes left and one session that I just want to pick up on. It might be at this point that you want to say a few words.
Derek, so Sarah Kotelecki has written, this is such an inspiring session about considering what's possible with your team.
Oh, wonderful.
I'd agree with that.
And it is about taking the team with you and exploring those opportunities with the team. David, do you want to take this opportunity?
Yes, please. No,
before we move on to the concluding bit of the evening.
Yes, please. Thank you, Derek. So obviously this evening has been sponsored by Atom Learning, which is why we can make these webinars completely free of charge. It was interesting, Derek, when you were talking about the why. One of the reasons that I love the fact that Atom sponsors these nights is because I think their why is to make every single child that they help a success. And Atom, if you've not heard of it before, is it's completely free for schools, learning system for schools. It's absolutely brilliant for homework. It's brilliant at identifying gaps in learning, which makes it superb for catch up. The resources are great as well. So what I'm going to do is just very quickly show you a 2-minute video. And then tomorrow, when I send out the recordings of tonight, you'll also have the opportunity to have a full demo with Atom to potentially trial it for your school. But as I say, one of the things I love about it is it's completely free of charge. There's no cost attached to it. So I'm just going to share my screen now. I'm trying to anyway.
Do I need to stop? I suspect.
I think you might have to, Derek. Yes.
There we go.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. That's great. There we are. Okay, desktop 2. Perfect. Okay, so this is Atom Learning, and I'm extremely grateful that they have sponsored tonight. Okay, fine, stop sharing that. Perfect. So there'll be further information about Atom coming out with the recording tomorrow. So that looks like the interlude's now over, Derek. So back to you.
Fantastic. I mean, that's a perfect example of a values-driven organisation, isn't it? And actually living that in terms of what they do. So I think it's a brilliant exemplification. So thank you. Okay, back we go. Let's hope we're at the right slide.
Brilliant. We've had a nice comment, Derek, from Louisa Ingram. So the idea of starting with the why is really interesting, thinking about how I deliver messages in school. Yeah, and I think if there's certainly one key takeaway, it's absolutely that. It's absolutely that. Whatever your how and your what, come back to that. Fantastic. So into the final section, about 10 minutes, I guess, and then we'll have some final opportunities for comments. Now then, why doesn't it want to move? Okay, let's try again. I'll stop the share. Maybe I need to go back to, let's go for that one. I might need to just flick through, forgive me. As I said, I was a sports college head, not a technology college head, but we can usually find a way around if we get to the resume. Almost there. There he is. Let's climb again. Right, there we go. So what do you do with your team? So how are we now going to think about sustaining that performance if we built the team? So Hope Powell, one of the predecessors of the coaches of the Lionesses, how do you choose your people? And how do you keep them learning?
How do you keep them excited and motivated? Let's listen to the master again in terms of Ferguson.
The right style for each individual.
You know, you have to be versatile in that. You have to motivate human beings. You have to try to get them to be the best they possibly can be. And I think also that recognition, to recognise your work staff and praise them. Because I always feel the value is that you're building a fort around yourself. You know, that you recognise the contributions made on a regular basis by people who you depend on.
Most managers who are successful stick with whatever formula brought them that success and maybe hang on to it for too long. But your willingness to evolve and to adapt to that change in the environment and in science was really quite unusual.
I think the important thing is to accept change. What worked 25 years ago didn't necessarily mean it's going to work forevermore. So we're always moving all the time, always forward.
So accepting that change is a constant and not being satisfied with reaching a peak in performance, the willingness of all within the organisation to accept that they're continually learning. We'll come back to Jürgen if we have time. No offence to any Liverpool supporters there, but we will move it forward. Tracy Neville, it's great that we win, but you need to be reflective. And I think Steve Hanson's brilliant on this.
You should win. It had to be more than winning. It had to be how we won and how we conducted ourselves, not only on the park but off it as well. There's nothing worse than watching an arrogant winner. I don't want any team that I'm associated with to be arrogant winners. And it's being honest with yourself as a group, I think. You know, like, what are the things, whilst we're winning, what are the things we're not doing that well? And what are we going to do about that? Are we going to be brave enough to tell ourselves that actually we're lucky today because we didn't do that very good? So little things like inconvenient facts about how you operate. And most sporting teams and companies that I've spoken to, they could all sit down and 10 minutes write all the values on a whiteboard. That's the easy part. The hard part's living it. And the harder part is living it from the top down, not the bottom up. And those characteristics, it's work ethic, it's selflessness. Or it might be just when the water comes out, you give another guy a drink before you do. Or it might be the doctor's bag, and you carry it to the door. And after a week, have a look at how many selfless acts you've done. If there's nothing there, what's that tell you? And look at the other teams and say, right, what do we do better than them? What do they do better than us? What do they do the same as us? And it's quite refreshing because you work out actually they do some things better than we do. So let's go and pinch those things and add them to our game.
So that willingness to learn, that willingness to recognise inconvenient facts. And is that something that you might look at internally if it's about, I mean, we know in-school variation is probably greater than variations between schools in terms of performance. You know, is there the openness and the honesty for departmental discussion about that? What does the geography department do better than the history department, vice versa? Where do we learn? Where are we prepared to learn? And also, what selfless acts do we do as individuals? Are we prepared to be outward facing? Are we prepared to learn? And I like this one from Ian McGeechan, the most successful British Lions rugby coach of all time. I'm the player's conscience. Do you pose these questions to your team? Is that good enough? Are we doing that well enough? Are we doing that often enough? Interestingly, one of the things that I found most sort of effective from this is that I would periodically ask both staff and students, what should we keep doing? What should we start doing? And what should we stop doing? And I find that was a really interesting structure for whole school staff meeting, student council. I got the student council to report back at the first staff meeting of the year in terms of what their reflections were on what we should keep doing, i.e. what we do really well, what we feel that we're not doing, i.e. what we should start doing. Clearly, there are some things that actually aren't effective at all. Let's be honest enough to admit that. So that's, I think, quite an interesting way of looking at it. You may have seen that curve before. Anybody wants to put in chat if they've seen it. It's actually from a management and leadership guru, Charles Handy. He calls it the sigmoid curve. And I think it's a really interesting one, particularly reflecting on what Ferguson had to say. That can be the trajectory of any organisation or any school. And if you look at curve 1, you're on an upward trend. But what is the point at which you decide that you are going to revisit values, policies, attitudes, behaviour? Are you going to wait to go into decline? Or are you going to begin the next phase of change and improvement before you hit that peak? Now, in that transition bit, it might get a bit choppy because you could have staff saying, well, hang on, what we're doing is fine, isn't it? Why are we looking to change? Why are we looking to do something different? But then it's potentially too late. In the business world, I guess, think Nokia, think Kodak, think Blockbuster Video. It's having that ability to vision what the next step needs to be, because actually you're going to move the organisation forward if you're prepared to embrace change, not change for change's sake, and engage your team in that process of the next curve, the next phase of transition, and be brave enough to accept that there's going to be challenge in that transition piece. But that's how really great organisations move forward. Sorry, the video quality is poor there, so let's just let's leave it there for a moment. What do you think about that? Whether you think that actually that sigmoid curve makes sense, that you've got to be brave enough as a leader to say, well, actually, we're going to explore now whether there's the opportunity to do this differently, and we're prepared to learn. Do it all the time with young people. So just some final reflections on what you might apply in your context to the performance of your team and sustaining that team's performance, and some very final thoughts about what it means, I guess, to be a leader in this context.
You want people to be able to try their best and not be inhibited from trying their best because they're scared of failing, because of what comes with that. And you don't want them to be scared of succeeding either because of what comes with that. You just want them to be confident to be who they are, and we should acknowledge some people are better than others at some things, and some people are worse at those same things. So it doesn't matter. No, it doesn't. But what does matter is that you're giving yourself the opportunity to be the best person you can be, and you should be frightened of that. If you can't love yourself, then you certainly can't love anybody else. And if you don't think that you've got value, then, what's your purpose for being here? I think that's why we've got to change that. Value is one of the core principles that make us get up in the morning and feel good about ourselves. I think if we can learn to value who we are, and understand our true identity is made up of so many different. I often think of a bridge when we talk about identity and the planks on the bridge. I'm not just a rugby coach. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a brother, I'm an uncle, and blah, 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 blah. There's so many planks. So when one of those planks breaks, you've still got the support of all the others. So to be able to value ourselves, we have to really understand our own true identity and what's the purpose of what we want to do. And then through that, we can help others succeed as well.
Really important, I think, to reflect, given the pressures that you inevitably will be under, and you are under as leaders, coming back to your values, your self-belief, your self-worth. Because when those times are challenging, if you have that clear set of values, which you have then articulated, there's the opportunity to have that solidity and that strength and that drive and that resilience that make you an outstanding leader. We'll click through. Paul Dunn, I'm always learning. I'm always listening. It's not just about technical knowledge. It's about self-awareness of who you are, identifying your super strengths and ensuring that those remain your super strengths and what you need to work on. If, as a leader, you are constantly learning and reflecting, that is going to make you the most effective leader that you can be. Something from Joe here, and then we're almost there.
For me, like leadership is unique to the person, isn't it? I don't think you should try and be something you're not as a person. I think you have to be unique, and I think sometimes as leaders we observe other people that lead and people try and copy that, and I don't think you can do that, because I don't think that then is what's the right word for it, in terms of, yeah, like you just have to be authentic, because people don't want to follow you if you're not authentic. So I think that's really important, and something that we started to do some work on now is with a psychologist that's come in is actually working with our players individually on leadership and what type of leaders they want to be.
So authenticity, because that's what's going to keep you up at night. If there's that dissonance between what you passionately feel and what you want for all of your young people, and a dissonance with that and the challenges that you face. And interestingly, how are you reflecting on that with the other leaders that you are growing? I just thought I would finish with Eddie, because there's a degree of irony of those of you that follow sport in what he is about to say. But I think he's actually right about what the role of a leader actually is.
Because ultimately, as a leader, what you're trying to do is make yourself redundant. Yeah, that's the ultimate test of leadership. If your team can go about do their job 100% effort, 100% attitude, then you've led that team well. Because leadership's about bringing the best out of the people around you. Yeah. Sometimes it's about making motivational speeches, but most of the time it's about getting people to work at their absolute optimum. Okay.
The slight irony, of course, is that just before Christmas, Eddie Jones was sacked by England Rugby, so he didn't make himself redundant, but he's just been appointed as the head coach for Australia before the next World Cup. But that point about what you are creating is the potential of others to lead and create legacy. So, going back to the beginning, one leadership learning outcome that you might have taken from the last hour, whether it's a practical piece of reflection, or maybe thinking, I'll go and read a bit more about that, or the way in which I structure my meetings, there's perhaps the opportunity to reflect on the work that you do to make your team the highest performing team that it can be, with joy. If there's some further leadership and thinking that you might be interested in, there's some quite good recommendations here. Some books that have got much more about them. They're great books if you like sport, but they've also got some really interesting leadership lessons. The Art of Captaincy by Brearley is really interesting, because he was managing some of the most charismatic cricketers, individuals of all time. He was an opening batsman. He freely admitted he was probably statistically the poorest performing opening batsman for England in its history. He was his greatest ever captain. There was a bigger win rate under Brearley than anybody else, because what he did to galvanise the team. Very interesting read. I've mentioned Legacy and Kerr and some latest there. A huge thank you. I'm sorry it hasn't been as interactive as it might have been, but I guess it's just the nature of the sessions. An opportunity to take any questions if there are, David, but also delighted to follow up the conversations, whether it's via Twitter or via email or anything else that may be of value.
Brilliant. Thank you, Derek. There's just while we're waiting to see if anything pops up on the chat, I think I'd just like to say thank you so much for that. There's a hell of a lot that you've packed into that hour, and I'm definitely going to be watching the video again just to recap on some things. So much resonated: the emotional intelligence, the taking the team with you, the Sigmund curve for me really made me think of Alex Ferguson, actually, when he broke up his first title winning team and sold lots of really good players, the Kanchelskis, so he could then bring through the class of 92 to really take that team onwards. That absolutely resonated. So thank you so much, Derek. I thought that was great. Liam Anderson has written a brilliant session, so many notes and reflections. Thank you for sharing as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, just recapping what I've said. Louisa Ingram has said thank you. Some really interesting reflections. The curve wasn't something I've come across before. While we're waiting just for a few more to come through, just a reminder to everybody that the next Wednesday Wisdom session is going to take place on Wednesday, the 8th of March. That's going to be with Robert Lilly, who is a lead inspector, and he's going to be talking about getting inspection ready. So that's going to be on the 8th of March. I'll be sending a link out for that if you want to join us tomorrow, along with the atom stuff as well. And obviously this session tonight has been recorded, so you'll be able to reflect on it, watch it again, and share it with your teams in school also. One more's come through, Derek. Thank you so much. This is from Kirsty Bleakley. Thank you. A really interesting session. Lots to think about.
Absolute joy. Thank you so much. And I say, if there's wider dialogue, delighted to pick it up.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Derek. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you very much. You take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.